Hi, I'm Rich Greb, founder and president of Camera Motion Research here in Raleigh, North Carolina. In this video, we'll start with showing you how to mount and properly balance your camera so that it will fly smoothly for you. Then we'll get into some basic flying techniques and show you how to extend your range for some beautiful shots. Lastly, I'll show you how to use some of the accessories that come with the BlackBird. Whether you're flying the latest compact DSLR or an 8-pound video camera, you'll find the BlackBird to be versatile, quick, and easy to use. So let's get started. We'll start with mounting the camera mounting plate to your camera. The BlackBird mounting plate has 6 holes for the 1/4 20 screw, and you could start with the hole in the very middle if you wanted to, and for most cameras that'll work just fine because the stage has enough adjustment room. Also, there is a locating pin. The locating pin, of course, is only used with video cameras. If you're shooting with a DSLR, it doesn't have a locating pin hole, so you have to simply unscrew the locating pin that's on the BlackBird mounting plate. Now, to go a step further, ideally you would like to have the camera in the proper hole so that the camera's center of gravity ends up about over the middle hole in the mounting plate. If you take a guess at where the center of gravity of where this camera is, you know, it's going to be a little bit forward of this hole because of the way the lens is. Probably going to be a little bit over here. I would guess that the center of gravity is somewhere there. This is not critical at all. So if I line up that center hole with where I think the center of gravity is, it says, well, I should be using this hole right here because that's the closest one to the camera mounting hole. So I have the BlackBird mounting plate screwed into the camera. On the top of the BlackBird stage, there's a clamp that is going to hold the mounting plate. I'm going to screw that out a little bit and just drop the camera in like that. Tighten up the clamp. Now, I want to point out that when you tighten up the clamp, and we want to make sure that the mounting plate is seated properly, and always check that you're secure. Another thing to understand is that the mounting plate slides forward and back. And if you want to have a reference point for the next time you set it up, there's a line of numbers along here that you can line up with the edge of the mounting plate. And the final thing I want to show is that if the clamp is at least not too loose enough to let you slide it, you don't have to worry about the camera falling off because there is a safety pin. If your camera weighs 3 pounds or more, you're going to have the gimbal screwed directly into the base of the camera stage. You can adjust the position of the gimbal up or down by loosening the locking nut here. So you can screw it down to get it farther away. Whenever you get it adjusted to where you want it, you want to secure the locking nut like that. Finger tight. So I'm going to pull this out right now and show you something else that you should know. We have a feature on the threaded portion of this gimbal stem, which is a cutout with bare metal. When you first start to see that bare metal, then you shouldn't unscrew it any further. That will make sure that there's enough thread engagement in the base to keep it nice and strong and safe. If you're balancing a camera that weighs about 3 pounds or less, then you're going to need to use the gimbal extender, which will have the effect of dropping down the gimbal. So you screw the gimbal extender into the base first, and it has the same kind of a locking nut to secure it, and it also has the same visual cue, which is a bare metal cutout to tell you when you've dropped it down as far as you should. And then you can screw in the gimbal into the bottom of the gimbal extender and tighten its locking nut securely. I want to talk about horizontal trim. showed that the camera mounting plate can be slid forward and back to adjust with front to back tilt. Additionally, the stage has built into it a front to back adjustment, shown here at the back, and a side to side. Both of these screws work the same way, and that is, if you turn them clockwise, the stage moves away from your finger. So if I turn this screw clockwise, the stage is moving forward. Likewise, if I turn this screw clockwise, the stage is moving to the right side if I was holding it normally. So those are how adjustments are made. And in order to get a good, accurate drop time measurement, you need to have the camera in at least rough, decent horizontal balance. So I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to get it back here to where, of course, you have these convenient bubble levels here that help doing that. I'm going to get it approximately level. And actually that looks pretty good right there, so that I can get a good drop time measurement. Adjusting or trimming the vertical balance to get the right drop time is just about the most important thing you need to do in order to improve your flying experience. What I'm going to do is take a minute here to tell you how to measure, tell you what drop time is and how to measure it. Drop time is the time it takes when you're holding the stabilizer in this horizontal position and release it until it comes down to the vertical position. So it's the time it takes to fall from horizontal down to vertical. Of course, you have to start out with it being bottom heavy, otherwise it might want to go that way. But what I want to do is a simple demonstration here of how we measure it. So I'm going to count when I release this. 1, 2, 3, 4. So I got about 4. Let's do it again. 1, 2, 3. I got 3 that time. Maybe I'll do it one more time. 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000. Well, actually, the real drop time is about 2 seconds, and my point for that little exercise is that you need to calibrate your counting. If you're not using a stopwatch, like you could put the BlackBird on a docking stand and tip it with one hand and use a stopwatch with the other. The point is, calibrate your counting. The simplest way to do that is to use the count by thousands trick. Eventually, you'll get to the point where you can just look at the way it falls and say, that's about right. You have 3 ways to adjust the drop time of your BlackBird stabilizer. You can change the amount of counterweight you have down here. You can move the T-bar up and down. And lastly, you can adjust the gimbal position up and down. So before talking about how you actually make adjustments to change the drop time, I think it's helpful to understand what we'll call the seesaw analogy. At the gimbal, we consider the gimbal to be the pivot point of a seesaw. If you can imagine that, that this is a seesaw with a bar running straight across here. Now it's a little bit confusing because the BlackBird has this support arm out here. But mechanically I can tell you it behaves just like there were a bar straight across. So if you think of this as the seesaw with the pivot point right here, and what we're going to do is adjust either the weight up here or its distance to the pivot point, or the weight down here or its distance to the pivot point. Ultimately, we're going to want to have this seesaw balance so that it's just a little bit bottom heavy. I'm going to walk through balancing a camera on the BlackBird. This is the fun part. This is the part that everyone wants to do all the time, right? So right now this BlackBird has this T2i on it, and you know, the normal about 2-second drop time. And what I'm going to do is take this camera off. Oh, one more thing. Let me show. So we don't have an adjustment for dynamic balance. That's how well it performs in the pan axis. It's inherent if you level the camera. It's inherent in the design, I should say. So here I can do this kind of a little dynamic balance test like that. You can see where that is. I'm going to take this T2i off, and mount this 7D with a 24-70 f2.8 lens. And you'll note that I'm using the same mounting hole on the camera mounting plate for each of these. And I'm going to balance this much heavier camera. This is a little over 4 pounds. The T2i is about 1.5 pounds. So it's quite a bit different. And because I know I'm going to need to do it, I'm going to leave this gimbal extender on. We'll see what we can do. But I am going to shorten it up. So let me go ahead and do that. All right, and I'll bring the extender itself up a little bit. So I've moved in effect, moved the camera down closer to the gimbal. Let's go ahead and drop this 7D in. Some people would consider this a real challenging camera to balance because of its geometry with this heavy lens out here, but for the BlackBird, because we designed it to be easy to balance just about any camera, it's really not a problem. It's really no different than any other camera. Now, I know I'm going to have to add some weight down here, so let me go ahead and replace each of these small weights that were used for the T2i with start with one larger weight, one large weight on either side. Okay, get that in there. Tighten that up. Drop one in over here. Okay, and tighten that up. So I know I might want to drop this T-bar down too, but let's just see where we are right now. Whoa, it's really, really top heavy. So I know I haven't, and even if I drop this bar down like that, well, it's still quite a bit top heavy. Okay, I'm going to add some more weight down here. I'm going to start by adding one more large weight to either side. Drop that in. Get one over here. And tighten that up. All right, so now we have two large weights on either side. Let's see where this is now. Well, okay, success. I can see that it's bottom heavy. I'm going to have to trim the horizontal a little bit. Okay, do a little bit of that. That's a little better. Another check on this drop time. 1/1002. It's a little bit fast, so I can, because it's a little bit fast, I can raise this bar up. Or of course I could have dropped the gimbal extender down, but we'll move the bar. It's easy to do. Getting there. Try another little adjustment and see where the drop time is. Still a little bit fast. This time I'll get it. All right. And voila, that's about the 2-second drop time. Have to adjust the horizontal just a little bit more. So that was really pretty easy to do. I think I adjusted the horizontal a little too much. That was really pretty easy to do. So we've got a nice drop time there. And let me trim this horizontal again a little bit finer, because I'm going to demonstrate that now with this radically different camera on the BlackBird, again, the BlackBird, we didn't do any adjustment for dynamic balance, but it's inherently good. Now I'm going to try a dynamic spin on this. I don't know whether I'm rocking it when holding it or not. it's reasonably good. Now, I left the gimbal extender on, and this is a 4-pound camera, so really we could remove this gimbal extender and move the gimbal a little closer up to the camera, and that would allow us to, or force us if you will, to raise the T-bar, which you might want to do if you just want to shrink the overall height. So put this down. I'll take this gimbal extender off. And just put the gimbal directly into the base of the BlackBird. I'm going to go ahead and run it all the way up and see where we are. See what we have to do to the T-bar to get a good drop time. Now I know I'm going to have to bring the T-bar up because now it's going to be very bottom heavy. I can bring the T-bar up. Let's see what that does. Maybe too far, I don't know. No, it's still fast. So what I'm going to do is come down a little bit with this gimbal. That's the top heavy direction. Let's see where we are here. Oh, getting there. I'll bring it out a little more. You can see that. Now let's see where we are. Getting there. I can bring this up just a tad so I can, with the gimbal extender removed, 2 weights on the bottom, I've now got this pretty close. We're approaching the 2-second drop time. Can I come out some more? Yep, that's about the limit. I'm starting to see the little cutout there. One final check. This last configuration with the 5D and heavy lens was adjusted to a little faster than a 2-second drop time. Of course, I could have stepped down to 1 large and 1 small weight on either side to get a slower drop time. The other thing is that with this lens, it's actually telephoto now. If you go full wide, it goes way out. All right, you see what's happening to the balance, but of course, that's very easy to adjust like that. Went a little too far. And now I've got it pretty well balanced. Do a little left to right. And that shouldn't have changed the drop time at all. Let's verify that. Okay, there we are. We're going to show some different cameras balanced on the BlackBird. So this is a 5D. Notice we don't have a gimbal extender, not using one here. We could use a gimbal extender. But anyway, this is balanced with 1 large counterweight at the bottom on each side, and it has about a 2-second drop time. This is my trusty GL2. Got it balanced with no gimbal extender and 1 large weight on either side of the horizontal bar. And this is also close to a 2-second drop time. And here's a DVX 100. It's balanced with no gimbal extender, 1 large weight, 1 small weight on either side. We've got, should have about the same 2-second drop time or so. And here's a 5D. This 5D is mounted on rails with a mat box attached. We've got 3 large weights on either side of the horizontal bar, and again, this is balanced for the 2-second drop time. The last camera we're going to show balanced on the BlackBird is this EX1. It's balanced with no gimbal extender, of course. We've got 3 large weights and 1 small weight on each side of it. And let's take a look at the drop time that we've got set on this. Should be around the 2 seconds we've been setting them all at, and it is. Now, one thing I need to remind everyone is that The view screen needs to be out in the position you're going to use it when you balance the camera, because if you don't have it out in that position, look what happens in the case of this camera to the horizontal balance. Pretty bad. Let me bring that view screen back. Okay, and then we're back to there. And another thing with a camera this heavy, it's a great camera to demonstrate how useful this resting stand is. I want to talk a little bit about some things that you can do to improve the stability of your rig. A lot of shots have been with this T2i on a BlackBird, one small weight on either side of the horizontal bar, gimbal extender. It flies pretty good. I like it. It's light. This weighs about 4 pounds and I think 3 or 4 ounces, something like that. Actually, a lot of the shots that I've taken that we've used in this video were with a slightly modified rig. And what I did was I added some weight to improve the stability. And I'm going to show you what I did. Let me take this T2i off this rig, and I'll tell you what I'm going to do. First, I'm going to mount an H4n audio recorder into the hot shoe. And I believe this adds about 3/4 of a pound, and it also adds some mass that's high up. Let me get this locked down good here. All right. Now I have another BlackBird setup that I've already balanced. And this BlackBird, again, has the gimbal extender, but I have added one large weight to either side. So adding those 2 large weights adds about almost exactly 4/10 of a pound to the weight of the stabilizer itself. I've done one other thing. I've switched to the 15-inch horizontal bar. That's going to add a significant amount of pan stability, pan moment of inertia. So I'll go ahead and now put this T2i with the H4n on top onto this. Let's see now. One other thing is, when I balanced this, I noted that when I balanced it earlier, I noted that I had set the camera mounting plate to about 6 on the scale here. So hopefully if I do that now, it's going to be pretty close to having the right balance. I've already set the T-bar height to give me about the right drop time. Let's see where we are. So the horizontal balance is pretty good there. All right. Now I can really feel the increase in pan moment of inertia. It's just a lot more stable. In other words, it takes a little more force on my control fingers to pan it, which means I don't have to be as delicate also if I'm trying to control roll. So the key here is I've added a lot of moment of inertia to this rig. I don't have to be quite as delicate. It's easier to control. All right? So the weight of this rig now is about, I think, 5 1/4 pounds, kind of in the medium weight range. It's not very light, but it's also not too heavy. I can fly this for a long time. I think many people could. So the trick here, again, to summarize, I added some weight up here, had to add some counterweight at the bottom, went to the longer bar, and it gives me a rig that's much easier to control, a lot more stable. I'm going to talk about a unique feature of the BlackBird that we call Smooth Touch, which is adjustable friction, gimbal friction in the tilt and roll directions. The first question you might ask is, why in the world would you want to add friction to the gimbal? Everyone knows that gimbals have to be low friction so that they can isolate the camera from hand movements. In fact, we designed the BlackBird gimbal with ultra low friction bearings. And I'd like to sort of demonstrate that by starting this GL2 rocking on this docking bracket stand over here. While I continue talking, you might notice in the background that it's going to pendulum for quite a long time. It'll be penduluming long after I stop. So we also found, though, that Adding a little bit of gimbal friction in the tilt and roll direction can be very beneficial for shots. It's great for beginners who have more difficulty controlling the camera because it dampens the otherwise squirrely movements. It can be very useful or helpful in windy conditions, I should say. And it can also help in those kind of run and gun shots where you don't have a second chance and you don't want to lose the shot because you have a lot of rolling. The gimbal friction provides some damping that will make those shots smoother and less risky. And as you can see, we're still penduluming over here and will be for quite some time because the smooth touch gimbal friction is adjusted off on that gimbal. This is not the way you fly your BlackBird. You're going to be using two hands. One hand is going to be supporting the BlackBird. The second hand is going to be using your thumb and index finger very delicately on the upper control ring. I can't stress how careful you have to be about doing it. This is something that you'll learn with practice. The lighter the touch, the better the control that you'll have. I even show beginners a technique where they don't keep their fingers on the ring all the time, and that is, while they're moving, they make very small, brief contact trimming adjustments. And it works for a lot of people. That light contact, generally speaking, the least contact you have with the control ring, the better your shots are going to look. You can also, if you have a very heavy rig, use your control hand by interlocking fingers with the golf grip to help support the weight of the camera, but still use your thumb and index finger for control like that. Did I say delicate touch? I can't emphasize that too much. That's what you're going to learn with lots of practice. Of course, it's real easy to stand here and be delicate. It's a lot more difficult, and that's where the practice comes in when you're moving around to keep that delicate touch. But practice will make it work for you. The one time you really have to grab the control ring is if you're doing a little tilt shot. Tilted down or tilted up, you're going to have to keep your fingers firmly on it. So for your tilted shots, you're going to be gripping the control ring, either pushing down or pushing up. And you'll note that when you do that, putting the force on the control ring, because there's very little pan friction, it's kind of hard to avoid wobble. So if you have tilt shots that are just a few seconds, well, you can do it this way. And you have to be very careful about not putting too much pan into your shot either way. So if I was going along and wanted to just tilt down for a little bit, you know, I do it like that. If I had a longer shot, if I had a shot that lasted 5, 10, 15, 20 seconds, then I'd want to go ahead and trim the horizontal balance for the shot. So if I'm shooting down, I'll go ahead and trim the balance down like that to the angle that I'm looking for the right framing, and leave it there. Now I don't have to really do much to keep the camera in that position. Just again, that light, delicate control, which will provide a better shot. Tilting up, same way, just balance it back, and you're all set. I want to talk about a few basics around walking with your BlackBird. The first is that when you're walking, try to keep your feet close together. If you have your feet spread apart, then there's a tendency for you to do something like this. All right? The second thing is that you should have your knees bent just a little, drop down an inch or two like this.
Now here's why you might want to walk with your knees bent. First, watch Brent walking normally along our wall grid and pay close attention to the slight up and down movement of his shoulders. When your shoulders move up and down, for the most part, so does the camera. But almost if by magic, if you just bend your knees a little, the vertical movement of your shoulders is greatly reduced. This works for almost everyone. The vertical bobbing is most noticeable when your shot has a nearby horizontal surface or even just the ground. Take a look at this shot. This is normal walking.
Same speed.
Here's the same shot with knees bent while walking.
Third thing is that you want to try to keep your camera height constant. Your shots will look a lot better if your boom height of the camera is not going up and down all over the place like that. I call that lazy booming. Unless for the effect of your shot, you need to be booming, try to keep your boom height level. You'll end up with a better looking shot in the end. If you're walking backwards, and I mean if you're taking more than just a step or two backwards, if you're really walking backwards continuously, the most important thing you need to do is
use a spotter.
If you're taking low shots, the BlackBird gimbal has a wide angle range, so you can drop down like that. And if you need to, you can bend your knees.
Walking along crouched over like this is a bit awkward, but it does allow you to make some nice low shots.
Here's some more pretty basic information about moving around with your BlackBird. First of all, you want to avoid any sudden starts or stops. Those are the worst thing you can do. The example I can give you is if you take a look at what's happening here as I do that, you see the BlackBird has started to pendulum. So that was caused by that sudden acceleration and or the sudden stop. So you need to make those movements a little smoother, more stealthy, move like a cat, whatever you want to call it. The other thing I want to say at this time is that earlier I talked about, controlling the BlackBird with your control fingers, thumb and index finger, and that's what you'll really be practicing more than anything else in your walking around shots to keep the camera steady. But there's also a role for your supporting arm. And the role is that your supporting arm can provide a little bit of a spring buffer to your body movements, so that to help smooth out the body movements, you are using your supporting arm to keep the camera smooth. It's the kind of thing we all learn walking down a hallway carrying a cup of coffee. It's something that becomes automatic, and of course with a stabilizer you just have a heavier object, but it's important to practice. I'm going to try to give you some recommendations for how to move in order to get better and smoother shots. First of all, don't start quickly. Not a good idea. And in the same way, don't stop quickly. All right? So what you want to try to do is have those starts a little more gradual and the stops a little more gradual.
do that again. And if I didn't mention it, have your knees bent. I have a tendency to lean into the shot at the very end to help slow it down. And don't forget that your support arm is going to be cushioning your body movement. So something like this, starting out, maybe it's doing this, and ending up, maybe it's doing a little bit of that, all right? We showed how to measure drop time. We showed how to change drop time. We may have said that 2 seconds is a good drop time to work with, and I just want to talk a little bit more about that. For the demonstration I just did, was a fair amount of movement, and the reason there's a fair amount of movement is that the drop time is fast, okay? So with this is like a 1 second or less drop time, very fast, and so it's very susceptible, the camera is very susceptible, the stabilizer, to penduluming. And once it starts penduluming like that, it's going to keep going unless you control it. If I go back to a 2 second drop time, I've been recommending 2 seconds. Actually, I think 2.5 seconds might be better for a lot of people, but somewhere in that range, certainly more than 1.5 seconds and perhaps less than 3 seconds is a good drop time. And it doesn't matter what rig you're flying with. Whether you're flying with the lightest camera on your rig or the heaviest camera and a lot of weights, the tendency to pendulum from any accelerations or decelerations is going to be the same if the drop time is the same. So just having a heavier rig does not reduce penduluming, okay? Drop time is the key thing. That's why we focused on it so much. So anyway, let's see where the drop time is. I just raised the T-bar, and I'm going to actually make it even slower than that. Let's see where we are now. Counting by thousands. 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000. Almost 3 seconds. All right. Let me check the horizontal trim here a little bit. Looks pretty good. But with this slow drop time, the camera really is not very susceptible to those accelerations and decelerations. So in addition to all the things you do with the way you walk, how you walk, your footsteps, your bent knees, using your arm, again, like I said earlier, setting the right drop time is the most important thing you can do in flying your camera and getting the best shots. A question you might have is, would it be a good idea to balance the BlackBird so that it's just perfectly balanced? No drop time at all. It'll hang, it'll stay in any position just about that you put it in. It's great for very, very little reaction to the quick movements and so forth. The problem is that when you have it perfectly balanced, you are constantly going to have to adjust its position. A little wind, a little motion, a little tap, and it's going to drift. So it'll have a tendency to drift on you. It's not righting itself into that vertical position automatically. I'm going to talk a little bit more about using the BlackBird feature we call Smooth Touch. So Smooth Touch is when a little bit of friction is added to the gimbal to improve your shots. I want to point out one thing. So doing a drop test, by the way, the friction right now on this rig is not there. And I'm going to do a drop time test with this rig, and it should be around the 2 seconds drop, okay? If you add gimbal friction, it really isn't going to change the drop time much. Cranking up this little knob here, let's see where we are. I'm going to add a little bit more, and even a little bit more than that, so the friction will be real noticeable. All right, now that's really noticeable. And I'm going to repeat that drop time test.
1, 1,000, 2, 1,000. Not much change in the drop time, generally not more than 10–15% or so, hardly noticeable. That's just so that you understand when you're doing a drop time test and you have friction, what the effect is on the drop time. With this gimbal friction dialed in, there is a noticeable effect on adjusting the horizontal trim. For small angles, the friction is very noticeable, so that when you're making a horizontal trim, all right, it may seem like it's not responding. That's the gimbal friction that's involved. That's a trade-off, but the trade-off is that you have a rig that is a lot less squirrely and will allow you in many situations to get a better shot than you otherwise would. I'd like to talk about one more effect of adding some gimbal friction, and that is the effect on pan friction. If the handle is vertical like this and you have some gimbal friction, there really is no effect on pan friction at all. But when the handle is turned at an angle, for example, for a low shot like that, where it's more convenient to have the handle at a pretty good angle, what is actually happening is that when the camera rotates, those gimbal parts are rolling in both axes. And we've added some gimbal friction, and the effect is that that gimbal friction then gets translated into pan friction, which you can see right here. No friction vertical, but with the handle at an angle, quite a bit of friction. I'm going to do a demonstration of how our smooth touch gimbal friction can be used to help you with your shots. What I'll do is I'm going to do a simple shot walking against this grid behind me, and I'll be rolling on this camera. We'll see it in the video. So, and with the grid, you can really see what the camera is doing in terms of roll or tilt. Let's just, as a reference here, we've got this set up with, you know, about the 2-second drop time. And right now, the gimbal friction is turned off, essentially. It's very, very, very free. And, of course, in this condition, so just, you know, a gentle tap, and it starts the camera penduluming a little bit. So it requires, you know, with this, especially with this light rig, it kind of very delicate control on the control ring to keep your shot where you want it to be. Now, what I'm gonna do is, I'm gonna try a side tracking shot, and this camera is rolling, so we'll see that in the video. I'm leveling the bubble, and I'm just gonna walk a few feet back and do an abrupt stop. And I'll be doing this one-handed, because if I put my fingers on the control ring, you don't know whether it's me or the friction, any gimbal friction we might dial in is in effect. So here we go, one-handed, walking backwards, all right, and an abrupt stop. All right, and we get a little bit of roll there in the camera from that stop. So now, let's see, let me dial in some gimbal friction here. Let's see where that is. All right, that's not too much. And with that, now I should feel it's a little bit more, you know, this touch is, I can be a little bit less delicate, okay, because it's now damped with that little bit of friction I've dialed in. All right, let's see what the same side tracking shot looks like. Got the bubble level about right there, okay. So here we go back, and the abrupt stop. All right. Let me see if I can dial in even a little more gimbal friction. So here's where we are right now. All right, so I'm gonna a few more fractions of a turn here. Let's see what that does. Very noticeable. And of course, you should see now that there's some noticeable coupling as I rotate the gimbal. And now it's even stiffer when I touch the control ring, okay? It's even stiffer in terms of movement. The camera will almost hold a small angle, like that, like this one is, with that much gimbal friction. Let's see what this same shot looks like. I'm trying to duplicate conditions. Got the bubble level. Looks like that. Right about there. Let's see, right about there, okay. So we go out, and the abrupt stop. And it's even, more stable. So there is a trade-off in coupling, but especially for beginners, it's a very good way to minimize that roll that you tend to get in your shots, and it just makes it easier to control. It actually feels like a heavier rig with more inertia. I'd like to talk about some shots that I think you should practice, some shots that should be in your repertoire. There's an obvious great excitement about moving around with your camera and being able to move through crowds, do all kinds of ambulatory shots and so forth. I'm going to suggest that there are a few other shots that you should practice where you're really not moving around much. And the first is practice doing locked-off shots. Practice doing locked-off shots after you've finished your move. For example, whatever the move is, hold that locked off shot for a while. Watch how maintaining a good motionless locked off position is really important to making this shot work. Another thing you can practice is simulated slider shots. So you could be stationary and doing shots like this. Okay. Here's a tip for improving your shots where you are turning a corner. Start panning with the camera just before you turn the corner. The important thing is to keep the sidewall in view. Watch the slow motion replay and how panning the camera starts before turning the corner. If you have a shot where you're walking in front of your subject and don't want to be walking backwards because you're going through an obstacle course and you don't have a spotter, there's another type of shot called the Don Juan, which if you have a video camera with a view screen that you can flip over, allows you to have the camera pointed behind you like this, so that you can then see what you're shooting. Now there's one more thing. For this kind of a shot, I might want to rotate the horizontal bar, which I'll do right here, and have it go front to back. And that'll give me a little bit of clearance. Don't have to worry about bumping into it while I'm doing the shot. So when I'm taking the shot, I'm going along like this, looking at the screen. It really doesn't matter what the rotational position of the horizontal bar is. If you move it, you may have to adjust the horizontal trim a little bit, but in terms of performance as a stabilizer, it has virtually no effect on the performance.
This is the closest you can get to a Don Juan shot using a DSLR without an external monitor. It's walking forward but almost looking back to see the monitor, and you just have very slight peripheral forward vision to see where you're going.
If you're shooting walking up or walking downstairs, the very most important thing I can tell you to do is to
Use a spotter.
Okay, assuming you're using a spotter, I think you'll find that you can get pretty smooth shots on the steps because your arm is going to take up the motion. One thing that you might have to practice is if your subject is below you or above you as they come to the landing or you step onto the landing, you may have to do a little bit of a boom to keep the headroom of your subject right. Here's a few tips for improving your technique when you're doing 360 shots. Those are the shots where you're circling around your subject. First, make sure that you have your camera in a position where you have a good view while you're walking, okay? So you can see what you're doing. The other thing is that I'm going to suggest that although the tendency is to be really focusing on the subject to keep the subject in frame, let the horizon be your focus. Let the subject be peripheral. Keep the subject in frame, because the thing that makes 360s look really fantastic is when you don't have a roll on the horizon and you have to concentrate on that. I'm going to give you some tips for shooting fast pans called whip pans, and the handsome gentleman right behind me, Brent, is going to be a subject for my whip pan. I want to talk about two things first. The most difficult part of doing a whip pan is ending the pan, and that's because once you start the motion, you want to have a very gentle stop. If you are squeezing the control rings too tightly, you get that kind of a thing, that bounce, that's your skin stretching. So this is just a practice thing. You can practice those whip pans at any time, soft stops. The second important thing about doing a whip pan is position yourself so that at the end of the whip, you can see what's going on to help you control that. So if I'm going to whip over that way, I'm going to want to do something like this so I can see where it's ending up. All right? So let me do some demonstrations. I'm going to be whipping between the poster over here and this handsome guy to my right. So what I'll do is, if I start over there, I'm going to shift around, something like that, to go back, do that. Let me do this just a few more times. Okay. Now if you're walking just before doing the whip pan, you use the same idea to get yourself positioned. If I'm walking that direction and I'm going to pan over there, I'm going to want to slide around to get ready to see where the pan is ending up. Same thing if I'm walking this way, I'm going to pan over there. I'll slide around, so I can control the end of the pan.
Whips can be cool effects. You can also try pivoting like this. Pivot pans usually aren't as fast, but like whips, they require a lot of practice to do well.
The BlackBird comes with two horizontal bars. There's an 11-inch bar and there's a 15-inch bar. You might want to use the 15-inch bar because it'll increase the pan stability. You can quickly change between them. I've already removed the counterweight screws from this 11-inch bar that's mounted here. Then I'll remove the locking nut at the bottom, slide out the bar, then I'll insert the 15-inch bar, line up the tapped hole in the middle, and put the locking nut back in. Make sure it's good and tight. And then, of course, reinsert the counterweight screws. This is our universal docking bracket, and I'm going to show you 3 ways you can use it to dock your BlackBird. First, I'm going to put it on this C-stand or light stand. Drop it over the spigot like that. There's a clamping nut on the back. And you can drop the handle right over that post to dock your BlackBird. You could dock it for just storing it, or you can do balance adjustments on it. Now, in addition to using the docking bracket with a light stand, you can use it with a tripod. And all you have to do, there's a 1/4 20 nut here. It's in adjustable position. Take your tripod release plate, screw it into the docking bracket, then I'll just drop it into the tripod, and again we can drop the handle over the post and use the tripod like that to dock your BlackBird. Finally, the third way the docking bracket can be used is with the table clamp that we provide. So we've got a table clamp clamped onto this table right here. And in this case, you want to be sure that you attach the docking bracket to the table clamp using the hole for the spigot closest to the post, like this. And the reason we say that is if you use the other one that was used with the light stand or C-stand, you can do quite a bit of torquing, and it's just not recommended. So you'd want to use this one right here, and there's a little nut to clamp it down. And again, you've got another way to dock your BlackBird if you don't have a light stand or a tripod handy. This is our tripod quick change adapter. I've already mounted the tripod quick release plate to the bottom of our adapter. So I'll just go ahead and drop this into the tripod here. And then take the camera off the BlackBird and simply drop it into the tripod adapter. Tighten the screw, and that's it. And this is my favorite accessory. We call it the resting stand. A lot of our customers call it a kickstand. For normal flying mode, it's down in this position. And it's spring loaded, so it stays in a nice locked position, won't shift balance on you. Then when you need to set your BlackBird with camera attached down, you just flip it up and set it down like that. You can set it down on any reasonably flat surface, including lumpy ground. One suggestion, if the horizontal bar isn't really squared up, you just loosen the clamp a little bit do a little pivot like that, get it nice and square, you'll have a nice stable platform, your camera's protected. Well, folks, that concludes our instructional video on the BlackBird handheld camera stabilizer. Thanks for watching it. We hope that it'll help you get started flying and inspire you to get the most out of your BlackBird. So from all of us at Camera Motion Research, happy shooting!